So I'll be candid, I didn't know really what to expect. So this PowerPoint presentation is something that I typically use for business students or even people who have started a business not understanding insurance or the ins and outs. But what I want to do is I'm going to diverge a little bit, because when I was listening to the panel, I'm a little removed from college, from high school, a couple years. So I look at things a little bit differently. I have a little bit more of a seasoning to me. And I want to tell you a little bit about me and my journey, and how when you look at a professional or when you're at a certain stage in your career, all the things that you did in your life, whether it's your schooling, really has an impact on how you run or how you conduct yourself, whether you're an employee, whether you're a business owner. So I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a background, because what I do now is totally dependent on what I've done in my life. So as you just heard, so I graduated from Myers High School, so I'm a public education product, which I had a great education there, and of course I went to college. I also went to graduate school as well, so I had a lot of education, which is great. And somebody had mentioned in the other room, how does it prepare you for your career? Well, it really didn't, and that's okay, but it gave you enough ability so that when you did get out, you had some basic understanding of business. But when I left graduate school, I went to New York City. That was my dream. Somebody says, well, what are you going to do? You're going to leave, your area. But it was always a dream for me. I think Philadelphia now is the most popular place to go. But I ended up working for a large international insurance company. And what I did was I was an underwriter. So I had the ability, or I had the job to analyze Fortune 500 companies. I was insuring directors and officers, executives of companies against liability, against, if God forbid something happened to them and they got sued, would they have the proper insurance? So it gave me a background, not just financial analyst, but to interact with executives. I had never interacted with a chief financial officer, a CEO. I mean, I'm sitting across these people. I'm 22 years old. These people are in their 50s and 60s. We're having lunch. We're having dinner together. They're talking about complex issues, and I'm sitting there going, oh my God, like I can't believe that I'm actually in control of whether they get insurance or not, or the fact that I'm going to charge them X amount of dollars by what they're telling me. It was a very humbling experience. But again, it was wonderful. Even when you went out to lunch, I can remember seeing how people ate. I mean, it sounds strange, but having the proper etiquette when you're in a restaurant and doing those things. And so I remember those things, and it helped me again through all the different phases of my career. And again, not related to insurance, but I'll get to that in a minute. And I wanted to mention too, so I moved back to Pennsylvania, and I ended up working in different aspects of insurance. But what I finally did was I hooked up with an old friend who was in the watch business, the wristwatch business, which is kind of an odd thing. I mean, nobody thinks of wristwatches, especially in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. But he and I ended up distributing Swiss-made watches. We traveled around the United States. We had distribution in the United States, in Canada, the Caribbean. So we were in charge of a very large territory, and our role was to get these watches into jewelry stores. So again, a lot of competition. No matter what you do in your life, there's going to be a tremendous amount of competition. Believe it or not, people don't, they do buy products that they know, of course, but it's all about relationship. It's how you communicate with them. And I remember having to break bread with them over dinner, trying to get people to appreciate what we did as compared to every other brand that was out there. So I go back to my stories about having dinner and making small talk with people. I know now we're texting and we're doing all these wonderful things, but to be able to sit and communicate with people, to get to know them, to understand who their kids are, or their girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever it may be, it's a skill set that you really need to hone in on. It's extremely important, because people want to like the people that they do business with, which again, I'll get to the point of insurance, and I know I'm diverging. Which then, once we did this, I was a salesperson when I first started. I was an employee, but I wanted more than that. So I remember going to my partner and I'm saying to him, or I should say my employer, and I said, you know what, I do a lot for this company. I think I should be a partner. I thought it was a little brazen. I can use a stronger word. And he, thought about it, and I became his partner. And eventually, not only to become his partner, but he's like, you know what? I can't stand running the business. I don't like working with the employees. I just can't do that. So I ended up doing that. And eventually, I decided, you know what? I need to go on my own. And so as a result, I ended up going to Europe. I ended up working with manufacturers, creating and putting in place relationships so that way I became a distributor. And then ultimately, I don't know if you all remember, back in 2008, there was a really difficult economic situation. And I said, you know what, I can't rely on these manufacturers. I'm going to become my own manufacturer. So I decided to, and I had relationships with different manufacturers, so I ended up working with a manufacturer in China. Began and created my own brand, designed my own watches, and started to produce them and had them distributed with my relationships from my past throughout the United States, Canada, the Caribbean. And fortunately, I had relationships with jewelers in Europe. So I'm bringing this up to you because all these past experiences helped create the opportunities that I kept going with. And I just want to tell, I always have a lot of stories because I feel I've been in some very interesting situations. And I wanted to mention one, and then I promise I'll get to the whole insurance thing. And by the way, this is all about risk. It's all about taking risks. Because when you look at it, everything I've done or everything you do is about risks. It's like, and I was thinking about it, I have 2 daughters who just graduated from Holy Redeemer High School. And when, I talk about, relationships, asking boys on dates, girls on dates, whatever it may be. When you're going to go and ask somebody on a date, you're taking a risk because they could say no. But sometimes what you do is you find out, well, do they actually like me or not? And then you're hedging your bet, you're hedging your risk. Well, that's insurance. I mean, you're already negotiating, and you don't even realize how much you negotiate when you're in school. And so I find that to be quite fascinating. But I do want to tell a story about how business, politics, and world global events really come together. So if you all remember the Iraq War, it was in the early 2000s, and I was a distributor for one of the manufacturers that was based out of Switzerland. And we had a meeting among all the distributors around the world. And so we're sitting around the room, and it's a very strenuous, I shouldn't say strenuous, very uncomfortable time. We had just invaded Iraq. Going overseas and flying was a little bit of a scary thing. So I get to this meeting, and there are all these distributors from all over the world. And somebody came up to me and said, I just want you to know that the former Iraqi distributor is going to be in the room. Just so you're aware of that. And I'm thinking, oh my God, like, what in the world do you say to somebody that your country just invaded their country? How do you deal with that? What do you say to the person? So, of course, not being an aggressive person, I just figured I'm going to let that go. After the meeting was over, he came over to me, and he stuck his hand out, shook my hand, and he said, I just want you to know that what the United States did, I support. And so we had this long conversation about that relationship, and I was just so surprised, again, how open an individual would be about something as difficult. I'm using this because, again, it's all about relationships. It's all about relationships. And ironically, that individual connected me to the manufacturer in China that I began to manufacture my watches with. So it's all this weird putting together of relationships. And again, I talk about that because that's really what business comes down to. Obviously, you have to have a great idea. Obviously, you have to be very organized. But relationships win the day when you're developing any kind of business. So again, I know that was a long introduction, but I thought it was important that no matter what you do in life, you're taking risks. You hedge your bets by finding out as much as you can about whatever it is you're going to do, and then you go for it. And the difference between people who are entrepreneurs and are not is they basically take a risk, or they ask the question, or they ask for a promotion. And by the way, an entrepreneur is not somebody who just owns a business. Anybody can be an entrepreneur. You can work in an organization and be an entrepreneur. It's somebody who thinks out of the box, somebody who thinks beyond themselves, somebody who is saying, I want to add my expertise, my talent and experience to the organization. That, to me, is an entrepreneur, not just putting your name on a door or a window. I mean, it's great and it's stressful and it's wonderful potentially, but the reality is We can all be entrepreneurs. It's just a matter of your mindset. So let me just go in a little bit and talk about finally what you came here to talk about or listen to. Okay. I'm just going to jump through some of the slides. So, business insurance, somewhat dry, necessary. Insurance is a necessary evil. You have car insurance, you have home insurance, you have health insurance, you have all these types of insurances. But the one thing that you have to think about is if you go into business, you have to have business insurance. So I'm going to step back a little bit. So when you are thinking about a company, or you have an idea, or you're saying, gosh, I can do that better than that person, and I have this wonderful thing that I've created, and I want to be able to build a business around it. The first thing that I say, and I heard it in the other room as well, is that when you have an idea, it's so critical that you talk to other people, get their impressions of it. Ask them what they think. You don't want just people who are going to say, yeah, great idea, and then move on. You want people to give you criticism, and I don't mean negatively. You want people to make you think about what it is you're trying to do. So you have an organization like TechBridge as an example. You have your schools, there's colleges, there's different organizations that can help you build a business plan, something that's going to flesh out all the details of whatever it is you want to sell. So when I went into business, it was very hard to put it together because you're putting yourself on the line. You're basically saying, here's what I want to do, here's what I want to sell, here's what I want to create, this is how much I think I'm going to be able to make or sell, this is how much it's going to cost me. I mean, you have to dig down deep. And then you need to rely, as I mentioned, on experts, accountants, lawyers, other business people. I heard the word mentor. It's critical. It's really important to have a mentor. It doesn't have to be an old person to be a mentor. It could be somebody you know that has experience. But that is very critical to be able to prepare yourself. So when you get to talk to somebody like me, all of a sudden I'm asking you questions. So if you look, you're going to say, you have to insure, for example, if you own a building. If you don't own a building and you're renting and you have all of your stuff in your rental space. So I'm going to start asking you questions. Number one, what is it that you do for a living? Can you explain it clearly and succinctly? Can you tell me what you do? And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of experiences I had as an insurance agent to try and get coverage for people when they didn't really have exactly the details in mind of what they did. So, for example, when I first started, I had a a hair salon. Pretty cut and dry, no pun intended, but a hair salon, somebody who just cut hair, colored hair, and all those things. So when I went to go and try to get these people insurance, it's ironic too, right? But when I went to get them insurance, all of a sudden, all the insurance companies were rejecting this organization, the hair salon. I'm like, what is going on? So I spoke to one of the underwriters, and they told me, well, do you know, on their website, they have happy hours in their hair salon. So they're providing alcohol to their, the patrons. And the insurance company is saying, well, wait a minute. You cut hair, you're giving them booze, they're going to drive home. Wait, this is not something we want to insure. And so I called the client and I basically said, look, what's going on here? He's like, oh yeah, we used to do happy hour. We don't do it anymore. And I said, well, this is killing your chances of getting insurance because, you're not a bar. You have to know what you do and you have to stay focused on it. People like me and insurance companies are now looking at websites. I had another company, a wonderful nonprofit. They were just starting out helping at-risk youth. So these are our kids that were having problems with drugs, alcohol, family issues. It was a great program. So again, I sent all the information off to the insurance company. I'm getting rejected left and right. And I'm like, what is going on? Come to find out, this is how detailed insurance companies are now. They weren't just looking at the website. They were looking at their social platforms, Instagram, all of the different platforms, and they found out that a lot of the members were wearing their nonprofit T-shirts in very controversial, in their mind, controversial events. They were going to different protests, and these were not something the insurance company thought would be a good fit. I know it sounds crazy, but that's how intense these insurance are. They are risk averse, and they want to understand what it is that you do. So I just wanted to mention that. And I had another one, a pizza place, who, they had this great idea. They were going to expand. They were going to have a bar and restaurant and alcohol, and that's not what they were doing. So they had projected what they wanted to do on their website, which was killing their chances of getting insurance. The point of what I'm saying is it's extremely important when you're going to get into business that you know exactly what you're doing. And it's really, really important to be able to talk to people who can help you along the way. If I can say anything that I've learned in my long career of business is I have relied on a lot of people to help me out. It hasn't always been fun. It's been it's been very self-reflective, but it really does help in the long run because they're going to tell you about their pitfalls. And I will say this, if you have an idea, if you have a thought, and somebody tells you it's a stupid idea, walk away from them as fast as possible. That is not the way you handle it. It doesn't mean that the idea is a good one, but believe it or not, there have been a lot of great ideas that have been shot down, and I have been told on a number of occasions, don't do it, it's never going to work for you, just stick with what you're doing, and that is another thing. It's all about risk-reward, but you have to believe in yourself, and the only way you're going to believe in your product is if you do research. And it's really important to be around people that are going to advise you, but not shoot you down. That's definitely something that I have learned, and I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I try to do that as well in my own life. So again, there are different elements. So if you own a building, if you have personal property, commercial insurance wants to cover that. They also want to cover if, God forbid, something happens to the business and you have to close. Let's just say, you have your office and it gets flooded and you can't work or you can't do your business. There's something called business income coverage. So these are all things that would be covered. And then there's a big one called general liability, which means, for example, if you own a pizza place, somebody comes in, slips and falls, they get hurt, that's general liability. So you would be covered if something happens like that. Or if you're serving pizza, and all of a sudden, everybody's getting sick. So there's, product, it's part of the liability. You had a question in the back?
Yeah, I got a question. So that business has to be
They need to hear you.
Does that business have to be like a physical business, or can it be like, can it be like an online business? Say like someone that's selling something online in order to get covered by insurance or something like that?
Online businesses?
Yeah.
I mean,
Does that include in the in like a business owner policy?
Yes, yes. So I have a number of clients who are purely online, meaning they sell 100% online. If you have an office, sometimes people just working from home, people have eBay stores or whatever it may be. But yeah, I mean, that's something you would see. If you're in business, you need to make sure that you have business insurance because, again, it doesn't just cover your personal property. It may cover if, again, you're selling something online, somebody gets hurt, it would be a product's liability. You may not be responsible, but it's potentially that you could have gotten sued from it, so it's important to have coverage. If that was your question, did I answer it? Okay, yeah. And again, if you have questions, I don't want to just keep talking. If you have something that you think would be important or something that's off topic, I'm happy to talk about it. But again, I think most importantly, a lot of this stuff is wonderful. But I really, after hearing what I heard in the other room, what I want you to take away from this is that you can do whatever it is that you want. It can be overwhelming, and it's good to ask questions. It's good to seek advice and guidance. And I think it's really important to know that there's nothing wrong with working in a company. There's nothing wrong with not working in a company. There are different stresses. There's different rewards. I know plenty of people who make a lot of money who work for companies. I know many of people who work for themselves and don't make much money, and some who make a lot of money. But I will tell you this, and I know this in my own career because my wife is my partner, so she can speak differently on what it's like to work with me. But I will say this, that we have grown because we have a very creative way of how we do business. The only problem that we have is managing the growth. So we have to go and hire people. So there's a lot of issues that are involved in growth. But again, it's really important you have a solid foundation of exactly what it is you want to do. So that's where the advisors come into play. So let me just move on. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Just quickly on this, so if you have a business, you need, if you own cars within that business, you need to have commercial auto insurance. If, for example, you're a contractor and you slap your name on the side of a truck or car, pretty much a commercial auto insurance policy. A lot of people who do work for businesses, it may just be going back and forth to work. You may not need a commercial auto insurance policy, but it is very important to discuss that. The one key thing, and I say this all the time, I ask a tremendous amount of questions to my clients, because if I don't know what they're doing, I can't insure them properly. If I don't know their motivation, if I don't know their goals, if I don't know what they're doing now versus what they want to do, I'm not going to insure them properly. And this all goes back to exactly what it is that you guys want to do when you're starting a business. So it's very important. But commercial auto insurance, again, is different than personal auto insurance. I did have a client who didn't tell me that he was doing commercial. I'm sorry, what was he doing? He was delivering businesses, and it was a part-time job, but he didn't tell me he was doing that. So if he got into an accident, he would not be covered, because he was delivering for a business, and personal auto policies typically do not cover that. So again, it's all about communication. It's all about communication. So. And then again, there's something called workers' compensation. So you have a business, you're lucky you've grown, you're no longer just the owner by yourself or with another partner, and you have employees. So it's mandated in the state of Pennsylvania that you have to have insurance on your workers. So if they get hurt, if you don't have it, and they go to the hospital and they say, well, what happened? And say, oh, well, I was, climbing a ladder when I was fixing a roof and I fell off and, I broke a couple bones. The hospital's going to say, well, this is coverage that should be under a business workers' compensation policy. If the owner doesn't have coverage, they're not only on the hook for all of the hospital bills that they would have to pay cash for, but they would get a hefty fine from the state of Pennsylvania for not having insurance coverage through workers' compensation. Again, these are all details that may not be terribly exciting, but if you don't have it, it's not a good thing. And then I'm going to just skip over this. I just want to go over general liability. So this is something that I find very fascinating. So I don't know how many of you have worked in a business, or if you've worked in retail, where somebody will come in and say, hey, I see you sell that product, I can get it somewhere else cheaper, or maybe something similar, or people complaining about the cost of things. I find it's always an issue whenever you're in business. People are always complaining about, I can get it cheaper elsewhere, whatever it may be. This is where a lot of times things are set apart when it comes to businesses, and this is why we really need to understand your business. So, for example, if you are a person like me, where you're in an office, you're not doing any manual labor, liability coverage is pretty limited, because you're looking at, slips and falls in an office, not happening very much. But when you're looking at products, and it's called products liability coverage, that's where things get a little bit more interesting. So as an example, let's just say, from my standpoint, I sell insurance, so this isn't going to be a big deal. But if maybe you're manufacturing baby products, or there's some devices, people are selling a lot of things online, small things that maybe you can get into a child's mouth. All of a sudden, if you're selling a product and somebody ends up choking on it, products liability coverage is a huge issue. And a lot of baby manufacturers, I'm just thinking of that as a product line, it's very expensive, very expensive. I worked with a company that was doing skateboard parks. Oh my God, extremely expensive if you think about it. We're all experts at skateboarding until we fall and, break our legs. So those are things that are very expensive, because they're insuring the product and what could happen if the product fails, what could happen if the product hurts somebody, those types of things. So when somebody comes to me and says, well, gosh, my friend, he pays only, or she pays only, a certain amount of money, why am I paying so much? Well, it's the business that you're in. It's never one size fits all. And I think it's really important when you're talking about this. Again, I know we're getting into the weeds, may not be terribly exciting, but this is really, really important by knowing what your product is. The other thing, too, is that you want to always focus on the products that you're selling, not what you're thinking of doing in the future. So again, these are all different elements of liability coverage that impact the premium and can impact it quite a bit. So that's just, again, something I know I'm going through this quick, but these are all elements of a business owner's policy. The other thing, and we talked again about consultants, we talked about people who can help you out in your business. Whenever you get in business, it's good to have a lawyer. Nothing wrong with going on LegalZoom if you are into the internet, but the reality is when you talk to an attorney, they can help you figure out some of the things that would be really important, you know, as you're taking on more risk. And I know when I was in the watch business, I had a lot of inventory. I also had a lot of my inventory in jewelry stores. Some they owned, some I owned. I also had salespeople on the road selling for me. So there was a lot of variables. I also had Amazon was one of my clients, and they housed a lot of my product. I also had product. I used to sell watches on TV, Shop NBC, which is, I don't know what the name is now. But they had a lot of my product. So one of the things that I was most concerned about, you know, how can I protect myself if something goes wrong and not lose my house, you know, all of my assets. So the legal organization is extremely important. And we don't have to go into intense detail, but you can see when you're going to start a business, it's not just, you know, hey, I want to sell online, or hey, I, you know, have this great idea, I'm going to go and sell at a retail store, whatever it is. There are a lot of things you have to think about. And the most important one is that you have to understand exactly what kind of business you're getting in. You have to know your financial situation. And typically when you're getting insurance, even if you're not in business yet, they need projections. So they need to know, well, what do you think you're going to do in a year? And then how are you going to meet these goals? Who are you going to sell to? How are you going to sell? Where are you going to sell? Are you selling in the United States? Are you selling overseas? I mean, there's all of these variables that you have to go into, and you have to share with me, because if you don't tell me something and I give you a policy and all of a sudden it doesn't cover it, that's a problem. I mean, it's a problem for me, but it's really a big problem for you. And I'm going to give you an example how something happened where it was really, really a sad situation. So I have a client who has a beautiful building, spent a fortune in redoing the entire building. And the one thing that he wanted, because he was very successful, he didn't want anybody to have to shovel his sidewalks. That was like a huge thing for him, like strange, but it was huge. So he ended up working with a plumber. They heated all the sidewalks on the property so that it would melt the snow. He spent a fortune. I mean, it was ridiculous. I still don't understand why. But again, he didn't want to have anybody shovel the snow. So come winter time, first snowfall, snow didn't melt. So unfortunately, the plumber never connected the system. So when he finally connected the system, there was a malfunction. Whatever happened, all of this frozen and cold water ended up going into his building, destroyed all the mechanisms underneath the sidewalks. Now imagine, you put all of these heating elements underneath the sidewalk, pour the concrete, and he did this at his own expense. And not only did it not work, it broke. He had to have all of the sidewalks repaired. He had everything redone, and he ended up having a flood in his basement, which caused a lot of damage. So what do? You go after the person who installed it. Well, the problem was the person that installed it had what's called a handyman's policy, which doesn't cover anything like plumbing. He didn't have the right policy. So when they went after him to get the money that they felt they were owed, there was no coverage, there was no insurance, the person had no money. He was out, you know, about $150,000 for heated sidewalks. That's, you know, something that I talk about. So you have to really be careful, too, with the people you work with. You have to ask a lot of questions, but it is really critical when you get into business to really, again, work with people that you can rely on, because they're the experts in their field, you're the expert in your field. Again, I know I've been going on, it's 12. Does anybody have any questions while I go through? Anything about life? Yes, sure.
What was the name of your watch brand?
It was called Montrec.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's this one here. Yeah, yeah. So, and it's fascinating because I will say this, I'm not a musician. I respect people who are extremely successful. I will say one of the sidelines of having a business and putting yourself out there, creating the name, creating everything about the product, and when you see people wearing it, or if you see people, again, if you're into designing clothing, whatever it may be, slapping the label on it, and I shouldn't say this, but it is incredibly gratifying to see people when you're walking around or having people email you saying how much they love your stuff. So it is gratifying. But I will say this, and again, I didn't really touch upon it. At that time, the retail world, and I think we're going to be going through it a little bit now, it was very difficult. People weren't buying. They weren't paying for things, so I had a lot of product that people owned that I wasn't being paid for. So, there is an incredible amount of risk that you take. But I will say, at the end, I ended up working with companies like Bloomingdale's, Barney's, Amazon. I had a lot of great relationships. I was on TV. My kids were embarrassed, but it was cool. It was a great way to figure out how I could sell watches in an environment where my traditional sales channels weren't working. Did online, did everything we could to create, and in the end, it didn't work because it was just way too costly. So when I was hearing the women speak in the other room, and we talk about risk reward, even though it didn't work, and I will tell you at the time, I felt like a huge failure. At the time, I had other parts of my business that were doing incredibly well, and then all of a sudden, the faucet turned off. I had to really figure out, what am I going to do? And by the way, people don't fail just at a young age. I was not a kid when I didn't have a business. I had 2 kids, and I had my wife, and I had a lot of debt. So I had to, what my father would describe, I had to reinvent myself. I had to figure out, what in the world am I going to do? And I'm telling you, I curled up in a ball for a number of months till I figured out. And somebody said to me, you know what? Nobody really needs a watch. If you look around the room, I don't know how many of you wear watches. There are plenty of people that wear watches, but everybody needs insurance. Literally, that is what I was told. Everybody needs insurance. So go from something where people really don't need to something that people need. And I'm not kidding you. That is exactly how I got into the insurance business. And I will say right now, even a couple years ago, I started an agency. My wife said, you know what? We need to go into a different style type of insurance. That was 5 years ago. We are now triple the size we were. We had to start all over again. And I'll tell you, not that I should reveal it, I was 50 years old at the time. I had to start all over again. But we did it. And, my wife loves to tell me all the time how right she was. And she was, because in the end, I wouldn't have moved. And now our business is so much larger, and it's so much more successful because I failed so many times. But I learned from those failures. I feel like if I didn't have them, actually nobody really wants them. So I had them, but I did learn from them, and it was a phenomenal experience. And I hope that the one thing that you do, if you do fail, or even like in your world now, you can bounce back. And don't listen to the people that are feeding that negativity. Gosh, that's one of the things I've moved away from in my life. Negativity is just life-sucking. Anybody else have any questions? Yes. Oh, 1 second.
Can you insure intellectual property? Like an idea? What if you had a really bad idea and it hurt somebody? And somebody tried to sue you for that. Could you get insurance for that?
Well, when you're talking about, it would have to be a patented idea. But just an idea, again, I'm not sure specifically what you're speaking about, but if you're just speaking and talking to somebody and something happens as a result of that, I don't know how we would have a correlation between, I don't know how you insure something like that. But if it's an idea that's been implemented, that's where professional liability, if you can see on the screen, that was perfect. I don't even think you meant to do that. But professional liability is another type of insurance. So for people like me, for doctors, for lawyers, for accountants, for architects, people who are, well, I mean, architects do the physical, but they're selling, we're not selling something tangible. So if we're giving somebody bad advice, or something goes wrong, for example, with me, if I don't provide a certain coverage and you say, wait a minute, you're my person, you didn't do the right thing for me. Well, professional liability covers you for that. So that's my product. I'm selling, just like a doctor, even though you have malpractice insurance for surgeries, but a lot of times we're dispensing advice and guidance, and that's people in management, consultants, they all need a different type of insurance like professional liability. So I carry quite a bit of it, just because in this day and age, people do rely heavily on our advice and our guidance, and we just want to be well protected. So in a way, if you do have an idea and advice and it's something that's actually you're using in your business, professional liability would be the way to go with that. So anybody else have any thoughts, any questions? Nothing. So I just, oh, sure.
You mentioned in the beginning the importance of being able to hold conversations. Do you have any advice for people going into the workforce on how to gain practice on being able to communicate with other people?
Sure. Put down your cell phone. I mean, again, we all talk on our cell phone. And nobody knows my kids, but they're like everybody. It's texting. First of all, in my line of business, I am shocked. Like, I'll call people, leave messages. I'm old school. If I text them, they get back to me in like a minute. I'm thinking, what's the deal? Am I that horrible? But people don't want to deal with anything. They don't want to communicate. They do communicate, but not in the traditional sense. So what I would say is, and I will tell you this also, even in my line of work, but in everybody's line of work, if you're emailing or texting people in the heat of the moment, first of all, take a deep breath for at least 30 seconds or put it on hold for a day if you're really angry, annoyed, because most of the time you'll look at it and go, wow, I should not have sent that. But what I do suggest is that you take a minute and then you rethink it. You cannot express your tone in an email. You cannot express your tone in a text. But I will tell you, and I don't, this is kind of it's not a strange story, but this is all about communication. So it's very difficult when you're communicating with people where English is not a first language. And this may tell you, and I'll try to answer your question. So I worked with people who were German speaking, French, Italian, and English was clearly their second language, and it wasn't sometimes the best. But I remember with one of the manufacturers, I had the good fortune, one of the people that owned one of the companies was the Prince of Hanover, Germany. I don't know if anybody knows, there's a prince in Germany, and his wife is Princess Caroline of Monaco, so there's also a princess out there. So I had the opportunity to go to their home and to meet with them because I was their American distributor, and they have homes here and they have family here. And I can remember we were having a discussion of all things about religion. One of the things that I've learned about Germany is they're very critical of their past. I'm not going to go into great detail, but very, very critical of their past. And they always would talk to me about their past and communicate with me about their past. And when we were having a conversation, the prince misspoke and said something horrible to me. And I realized he didn't mean it because English is his second language. And so I corrected him on it. And he's like, no, that's not what I meant. I meant the reverse of what I said. If he would have texted me that, I think our relationship would have been over because it was so horrible, but I knew he didn't mean that. And we had a wonderful relationship. And it's not because of his status, but it's all about communicating. I will tell you that most of my clients come to me because I have relationships with other people that refer me. 95% of my business is not me picking up the phone and calling people. It's the relationships I've developed with people who have a need for what I do for a living and want to refer other people. That's how I get my business. It wasn't because I texted. It wasn't because I just, said, oh, God, I called them once and they didn't call me back. I mean, my wife is always embarrassed. I will call somebody if I feel what I have to offer is going to be good for them. It's all about communication. I would say all of our clients buy from us. I shouldn't say all. Many buy because it's the price. I mean, you have to have a good product, but it is totally about the experience. And if you think you can't enjoy buying insurance, I make it as enjoyable as possible. I make it less stressful. I make it easy. I make them have to touch the paperwork as little as possible. I do all the things that they don't want to do, we will do for them because we want to make the experience better. I don't like texting, and so I do force people to communicate with me because that's the only way I can impart to them the importance of what I do. Otherwise, it's lost. So I would say that from a young age, I grew up in a house where my father, he was an attorney. He didn't consider himself an entrepreneur, but he was a true entrepreneur. And I had a lot of great role models in my own life. So I would say when it comes down to communication, do it early, do it often. If you can avoid texting people, and again, if you need to text them quickly, that's fine. But really, and also the other thing, you want to get great jobs, you want to get great experiences in life, you have to learn how to network and communicate early. You have to say, I don't know why I'm taking this course, it's a stupid course. But you may be surprised that even if you don't understand the application immediately, you may still learn things that are life lessons. It's amazing what you can learn if you just don't have that negative conversation in your head. So I know this isn't about insurance, but I mean, yeah. So.
Time for one quick question, if anyone has anything else. All right. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And by the way, this did more for me today. I will tell you that we've been having a very stressful time at work. And for Don to have asked me to come, which I question why, other than I've had a lot of experiences, but I just want you to know you gave me more this morning than I could probably ever have given you. So thank you for coming and listening to me. I truly appreciate it. And now I can go back and have a much better day. So thank you.